The most valuable gift you can give a stranger is a future. Claire Whitmore stared at the consent form in her trembling hands. The fluorescent lights above her hummed softly, casting a pale glow across the hospital waiting room. Around her, doctors moved with practiced urgency. Families whispered prayers, and somewhere beyond those walls, a man she had never met was fighting for another chance at life. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he looked like. All she knew was that without a donor, he might not survive much longer. Claire lowered her eyes to the signature line. She was only 24 years old. Most people her age were planning vacations, building careers, dreaming about their future. Yet here she was, preparing to give away a piece of herself to someone she would never meet. A nurse gently touched her shoulder. "You still have time to change your mind." Claire looked up and offered a small smile. "No, I made my decision." The nurse nodded and quietly walked away. Claire glanced toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. Rain streaked across the glass, turning the city lights into blurry ribbons of gold. For a moment, fear tightened around her chest. Not fear of the surgery, fear of uncertainty, fear of what came after. Her mother had been battling cancer for almost 2 years. The medical bills were overwhelming. Their small apartment felt smaller every month. Every day seemed like a struggle to keep hope alive. Yet somehow, despite everything, Claire couldn't ignore the feeling that helping another person mattered. Her mother always said kindness was the only thing that multiplied when you gave it away. Claire pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. Earlier that morning, she had written a short note for the recipient. The hospital would never reveal her identity, but the letter would be delivered anonymously if he survived. She unfolded it carefully and read the words one last time. "Live a life worth saving." Simple, honest, exactly what she wanted to say. Her eyes lingered on the sentence before she folded the paper and handed it to a staff member. A few minutes later, her mother entered the room, moving slowly but smiling. Warmly, Claire immediately stood and hugged her. "You don't have to do this, sweetheart," her mother whispered. Claire held her tighter. "Maybe I do." Tears glistened in her mother's eyes. "You're always thinking about everyone else." Claire laughed softly. "Not everyone. Just one stranger today." They stood together in silence as an announcement echoed through the hallway. It was time. Claire took a deep breath and followed the medical team toward the operating floor. With every step, the future felt less certain. But one thing remained clear. Somewhere inside this hospital, another person was waiting for a miracle. And today, Claire Whitmore was about to become one. What she could never imagine was that 5 years later, the man whose life she saved would walk back into hers, carrying a secret that would change everything. The surgery was successful. That was all Claire Whitmore ever learned. A few weeks after leaving the hospital, a short letter arrived from the transplant center thanking her for her generosity and confirming that the recipient was recovering well. No name, no photograph, no details, just a simple confirmation that somewhere in Chicago, a stranger had been given a second chance. Claire read the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it inside a small wooden box beside her bed. She told herself that was enough. It had to be enough. Life moved forward whether she was ready or not. Recovery was harder than she expected. Some mornings she woke up exhausted before the day even began. Medical appointments filled her calendar. Bills filled her mailbox. Still, she never regretted her decision. Whenever doubt tried to creep in, she remembered the words she had written. Live a life worth saving. If that stranger was alive, then the sacrifice mattered. But life seemed determined to test her optimism. 6 months later, her mother's condition worsened. The treatments became more frequent. The expenses became impossible to ignore. Claire picked up extra shifts wherever she could find them. She worked evenings, weekends, holidays. Sometimes she barely slept 4 hours before starting another day. Yet every time she walked into her mother's room, she forced a smile. Her mother deserved hope, even when Claire felt herself running out of it. Then came another loss. The man she had been dating for nearly 2 years sat across from her at a small coffee shop and quietly admitted he could not handle the uncertainty anymore. The hospital visits, the financial pressure, the endless responsibilities. Claire listened without arguing. Deep down, she had already seen it coming. When he left, she sat alone for nearly an hour staring at 2 untouched cups of coffee. For the first time in months, tears slipped down her cheeks. Not because she lost him, but because she felt tired. Tired of being strong. tired of pretending everything would somehow work out. A year later, the hardest goodbye arrived. Her mother passed away peacefully on a cool autumn morning with Claire holding her hand. The apartment felt unbearably quiet afterward. Every room carried memories. Every corner reminded her of someone who was gone. Grief settled over her life like a heavy winter coat she could never take off. Yet somehow she kept moving. One step, one day, one paycheck at a time. By the 5th year, Claire was living in a modest apartment on the north side of the city. The dreams she once had seemed distant now. She no longer thought much about the stranger whose life she had saved. She assumed he was out there somewhere, living his own story. What Claire did not know was that across town, a man named Ryan Sullivan had spent those same 5 years searching for the anonymous donor who gave him a future. And on a rainy Monday morning, fate quietly began bringing their worlds back together. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls of Sullivan Dynamics as employees hurried through the sleek lobby, carrying coffee cups and laptops. On the 42nd floor, Ryan Sullivan stood alone in his office, staring at the Chicago skyline stretching for miles beyond the windows. To the world, he had everything. He was 37 years old, the founder and chief executive officer of one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country. Financial magazines called him visionary. Investors called him brilliant. Reporters called him unstoppable. Yet every year on the same date, Ryan ignored interviews, canceled meetings, and disappeared for a few hours. Today was that day. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and carefully removed a worn piece of paper protected inside a clear sleeve. The edges had yellowed slightly over time. The handwriting was simple and neat. Live a life worth saving. 5 words. That was all he had. 5 words from the stranger who had saved his life. Ryan slowly sat down and ran his thumb along the edge of the sleeve. 5 years had passed since his transplant. 5 years since a donor he never met gave him the chance to build the company now worth billions. Doctors protected donor identities. Laws protected privacy. Every path he explored eventually ended at a locked door. Yet he never stopped searching. Something about the sacrifice haunted him. Someone had changed the course of his life without asking for anything in return. He could not explain why, but he felt he owed that person more than gratitude. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His executive assistant stepped inside. "Your 9 o'clock meeting starts in 10 minutes. Ryan nodded and carefully returned the letter to the drawer. "Anything else?" She checked her tablet. Human Resources finalized the new employee orientation list. 27 hires start today. Ryan barely reacted. New employees arrived every month. Usually he never met them. "Good," he said. "Send me the agenda." Across the city, Claire Whitmore adjusted the collar of her navy blazer while standing outside the massive headquarters building. Her stomach twisted with nervous energy. This job meant everything. After years of setbacks and temporary positions, she finally had a chance to rebuild her future. The glass tower reflected the cloudy morning sky above her as she stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby felt larger than some apartment buildings she had lived in. Polished marble floors gleamed beneath warm lights. Employees moved with confidence and purpose. Claire suddenly felt very small. She tightened her grip on her bag and followed signs toward orientation. Maybe this was the fresh start she needed. Maybe things could finally get better. 2 hours later, the group of new hires gathered inside a conference room overlooking the city. Conversations filled the room until the doors opened unexpectedly. Everyone fell silent. A tall man entered surrounded by senior executives. Claire glanced up briefly before returning her attention to her notebook. Meanwhile, across the room, Ryan scanned the new employees with polite indifference. Then his eyes stopped for a fraction of a second. Something about one woman seemed strangely familiar. He could not explain why. He simply looked away and continued speaking, completely unaware that fate had just placed the person he had searched for over 5 years directly in front of him. The days that followed felt ordinary to everyone except Ryan Sullivan. He told himself the strange feeling would pass. New employees came and went all the time. There was no reason for one woman in a conference room to linger in his thoughts. Yet somehow she did. 3 days later, Ryan stepped out of an executive meeting and walked through one of the operations floors. Conversations buzzed softly around rows of desks. Computer screens glowed beneath bright overhead lights. He barely paid attention until he heard a familiar voice nearby. "I think people matter more when they feel seen." Ryan stopped walking. The sentence was simple, almost forgettable, yet something about it stirred an old memory deep inside him. He turned slightly and saw Claire speaking with a coworker near the break area. She smiled politely before returning to her workstation. Ryan stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Then he continued walking without saying a word. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, Ryan found himself sitting alone in his office. The city sparkled beneath the darkening sky. He opened the drawer again and removed the letter. Live a life worth saving. His eyes moved across the familiar handwriting. For years he had wondered what kind of person would make such a sacrifice for someone they had never met. Someone who expected nothing in return. Someone who simply chose kindness. Suddenly, he remembered Claire's words from earlier that afternoon. People matter more when they feel seen. Different words. Similar feeling. The thought lingered. Across town, Claire was settling into her new routine. The job was demanding, but she enjoyed it. For the first time in years, she felt stable. Her small apartment was still modest. Her budget was still tight. Yet every morning, she woke up with purpose. One evening, while organizing reports after hours, she noticed a cleaning employee struggling to carry several heavy supply boxes. Most people had already left. Without hesitation, Claire stood and offered help. Together, they moved everything into storage. The older woman thanked her repeatedly. Claire simply smiled. We all need a little help sometimes. Neither woman noticed a figure standing farther down the hallway. Ryan had returned unexpectedly after forgetting a folder. He watched the interaction quietly before walking away. Something about Claire's actions felt genuine. Not performative. Not calculated. Genuine. The next week, Ryan attended a leadership luncheon where department managers highlighted outstanding new employees. Claire's name appeared briefly on a presentation slide. Consistently positive feedback. Strong work ethic. Excellent teamwork. Ryan should have moved on to the next topic. Instead, he found himself paying attention. After the meeting ended, he casually requested her personnel file. Human Resources sent it over within the hour. He skimmed through her resume. Community college courses. Administrative experience. Volunteer work. Nothing unusual. Then his eyes paused on a date. 5 years ago. Chicago Medical Center volunteer program. Ryan slowly leaned back in his chair. The same hospital where his transplant had taken place. Coincidence, he told himself. It had to be coincidence. Yet for the first time in years, a tiny piece of the puzzle seemed to move. And somewhere deep inside, a feeling he could not explain began growing stronger. For the next several weeks, Ryan tried to convince himself he was imagining connections that did not exist. Chicago was a city of millions. Thousands of people had passed through Chicago Medical Center over the years. One matching detail meant nothing. Yet every time he told himself to let it go, another piece appeared. One afternoon, he stepped into an elevator just as the doors were closing. Claire was already inside. She smiled politely and moved slightly to give him space. The ride should have been silent. Instead, Ryan noticed a small silver charm attached to her keychain. It was shaped like a tiny butterfly. Something about it seemed familiar. Before he could stop himself, he asked, "That looks important." Claire glanced down and smiled. It was my mother's. Her expression softened. She always said butterflies remind us that difficult seasons do not last forever. Ryan nodded quietly. For some reason, the answer stayed with him long after the elevator ride ended. A few days later, the company organized a volunteer event at a neighborhood food pantry. Most executives made brief appearances before leaving. Claire stayed nearly 6 hours. She helped unload deliveries, organize shelves, and sat with elderly visitors while they waited for assistance. Ryan watched from a distance. Nobody knew he was observing. Nobody was performing for his attention. Claire simply treated every person with the same kindness she showed everyone else. By the end of the afternoon, he found himself remembering the question that had haunted him for years. What kind of person gives a stranger a second chance at life? The answer standing before him seemed increasingly obvious. That evening, Ryan returned to his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The city lights reflected across the dark water below. He opened the drawer once again and removed the old letter. Live a life worth saving. This time he noticed something he had overlooked before. The handwriting leaned slightly to the right. Certain letters curved in a distinctive way. An idea formed in his mind. The next morning, he requested several internal reports from Human Resources. When the documents arrived, He compared signatures and handwritten notes from employee onboarding forms. He immediately felt ridiculous, yet his pulse quickened as he reached Claire's paperwork. The similarities were subtle, not proof, not even close, but enough to make his heart race. Ryan leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Could it really be possible? 5 years, thousands of dead ends, countless disappointments. And now a woman who worked 3 floors below his office seemed connected to every clue he uncovered. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why had she never said anything? If she was the donor, surely she would recognize the name Ryan Sullivan. Surely she would know he was the transplant recipient whose story had appeared in newspapers years ago. Unless she truly never cared about recognition. Unless she had meant every word in that letter. Across the office, Claire remained completely unaware of the storm building around her. She focused on deadlines, meetings, and learning her new role. She never noticed the growing number of times Ryan's gaze lingered a second longer than necessary. She never realized that the mystery he had chased for 5 years was beginning to point directly at her. And then, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, fate prepared to hand Ryan the one piece of evidence he could never ignore. Thursday afternoon arrived with the kind of quiet routine that made life feel predictable. Claire spent most of the day reviewing spreadsheets and preparing reports for an upcoming presentation. Outside the office windows, dark clouds rolled across the Chicago skyline, turning the afternoon lights soft and gray. She rubbed her temples and reached for a bottle of water. Lately, she had been feeling more tired than usual. She blamed the long hours, the adjustment period, the stress of starting over. Nothing more. Across the building, Ryan sat through a strategy meeting while barely hearing a word. His mind kept returning to the growing list of coincidences surrounding Claire. The hospital connection, the volunteer work, the kindness, the handwriting. Each clue pointed in the same direction. Yet he still lacked certainty. He needed proof before allowing himself to believe the impossible. Then his phone vibrated. A message from Human Resources appeared on the screen. Medical assistance requested on the operations floor. Employee experiencing a health emergency. Ryan stood immediately. Something deep inside him reacted before logic could catch up. By the time he reached the floor, several employees had gathered nearby. Claire sat in a chair, pale and visibly shaken. A company nurse knelt beside her asking questions. "I am fine," Claire insisted softly. "I just got dizzy." The nurse frowned. "You are not fine. Your blood pressure is unusually low." Ryan remained several feet away, trying not to attract attention. Relief washed over him when he saw she was conscious and speaking normally. Still, concern lingered. A few minutes later, the nurse convinced Claire to visit a nearby clinic for evaluation. The incident should have ended there. It did not. The following morning, Ryan received an unexpected call from an executive physician who handled employee wellness cases. Due to a paperwork error involving insurance verification, a confidential medical document had briefly been attached to a corporate benefits file before being removed. The physician immediately apologized and explained the mistake. Ryan barely listened after hearing one phrase. Previous living kidney donor. The world seemed to stop moving. "What did you say?" he asked quietly. The physician repeated the statement. Ryan thanked him and ended the call. For several seconds, he simply stared through the glass wall of his office. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed the letter. "Live a life worth saving." His hands trembled slightly. Every clue, every coincidence, every unanswered question from the last 5 years suddenly aligned into a single truth. Claire Whitmore had given away a kidney. Claire Whitmore had been connected to the same hospital. Claire Whitmore had entered his life carrying the same quiet compassion reflected in that letter. Ryan lowered himself into his chair, overwhelmed by emotion he had not felt in years. Gratitude, shock, humility. The woman he had spent half a decade searching for was not a distant mystery. She worked in his building. She rode the same elevators. She sat in meetings only a few floors away. And the most astonishing part of all was that she had never once mentioned it. Not because she forgot, not because she wanted something, because she truly expected nothing in return. For 5 years, Ryan had dreamed about finding his donor. Now that he finally had, one terrifying question remained. What if discovering the truth changed everything between them? Ryan spent the entire weekend wrestling with a truth that felt too extraordinary to be real. Every instinct told him to walk downstairs, tell Claire everything, and thank her for the gift that had given him a future. But another voice warned him to be careful. Claire had never revealed what she had done. She had never asked for recognition. If he approached her the wrong way, he could destroy the very thing he hoped to honor. By Monday morning, Ryan convinced himself that actions mattered more than words. He began making quiet arrangements. First came a substantial salary adjustment disguised as a performance review. Then a housing assistance package available only to select employees. Then an invitation to join a leadership development program that could fast-track her career. To Ryan, these were small gestures compared to what she had given him. To Claire, they felt confusing. Within 2 weeks, coworkers began noticing the sudden attention. Managers praised her work more often. Opportunities appeared that had never been mentioned before. At first, Claire assumed she had simply been working hard. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, she sat across from her supervisor reviewing a promotion pathway that normally took years to access. "I appreciate this," Claire said carefully. "But why is all of this happening so quickly?" Her supervisor smiled awkwardly. "You have supporters in senior leadership." The answer only deepened her suspicion. Later that evening, Claire requested a meeting with Ryan. When she entered his office, the sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Ryan stood as she approached. For a brief moment, neither spoke. "I need to ask you something," Claire said. "Of course. Why are you doing this?" Ryan hesitated. "Doing what?" Claire placed the promotion documents on his desk. "The raises. The programs. The special treatment." Her voice remained calm, but disappointment lingered beneath the surface. "I worked hard for this job, because I wanted to earn my place here. Now people think I am receiving favors." Ryan looked away. He could not tell her the truth. "Not yet. You deserve opportunities," he said quietly. Claire shook her head. "That is not an answer." Silence filled the office. Finally, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you look into my medical records?" Ryan felt his stomach drop. The question landed with frightening accuracy. Claire studied his expression and immediately understood. The color drained from her face. "You did." Ryan stepped forward. "Claire, please let me explain." "Explain what?" she asked softly. "That you discovered something personal and decided to repay it." The hurt in her voice struck harder than anger ever could. "I never wanted repayment." Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Claire picked up the documents from his desk. "I did not help someone years ago because I expected my life to become easier." Tears glistened in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "And I certainly did not do it so one day a billionaire could decide what I am worth." With that, she turned and walked away. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the office to find a sealed envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a resignation letter signed by Claire Whitmore. Ryan stared at the resignation letter for a long time after everyone else had gone home. The city lights beyond his office windows blurred into soft reflections across the glass. For 5 years, he had imagined the moment he would finally find the person who saved his life. He pictured gratitude, relief, closure. Never this. Never a situation where his actions would push her away. He picked up the letter again and read the final sentence. Effective immediately. The words felt heavier than any business loss he had ever experienced. For the first time in years, Ryan realized he had approached the situation exactly the wrong way. He had treated gratitude like a transaction. Claire had never wanted rewards. She had never wanted advantages. What she wanted was dignity, respect, the chance to be seen as a person instead of a debt to be repaid. 3 days later, Sullivan Dynamics hosted its annual company anniversary celebration. Hundreds of employees gathered inside a ballroom overlooking Lake Michigan. Large screens displayed company milestones. Music drifted through the room. Executives mingled with staff. Yet Ryan barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on a single empty chair near the back of the room. He knew Claire would not be there. She had already left the company. Even so, he could not stop looking. When the event reached its final segment, the lights dimmed and Ryan stepped onto the stage. The audience erupted into applause. Normally, he delivered polished speeches about growth, innovation, and future goals. Tonight was different. He stood silently for several seconds before reaching into his jacket pocket. The room gradually became quiet. 5 years ago, he began, someone I did not know made a decision that gave me a future. Confused expressions spread across the audience. Ryan unfolded a worn piece of paper. Many employees had never seen their chief executive appear nervous. Tonight, his voice carried an honesty that could not be rehearsed. I spent years searching for the person who saved my life, he continued. When I finally found her, I made a terrible mistake. I thought gratitude could be expressed through promotions, money, and opportunities. I was wrong. The room remained completely silent. Ryan looked down at the paper in his hands. This person left me a message after the surgery. Only 5 words. He took a breath and read them aloud. Live a life worth saving. Several people exchanged curious glances. Ryan smiled sadly. For years, I believed those words were a challenge. Build something meaningful. Accomplish something extraordinary. But I understand now that I misunderstood the message. A life worth saving is not measured by success. It is measured by kindness. His eyes moved across the audience. The woman who wrote those words never wanted recognition. She never asked for anything. She simply helped someone because she believed every life mattered. In a small apartment across the city, Claire sat on her couch watching the live stream on her laptop. She had intended to close it after a few minutes. Instead, tears slowly filled her eyes. Ryan's voice carried through the speakers with a sincerity she had never heard before. If she is watching, he said quietly, looking directly into the camera, I am sorry. Not for being grateful. For forgetting that the greatest gift can only be honored through understanding. And for the first time since leaving the company, Claire found herself listening instead of walking away. The morning after the anniversary event, Claire woke up expecting to feel the same certainty she had carried for weeks. Instead, she found herself replaying Ryan's words over and over again. Not the apology, not the public speech, the sincerity behind it. For years, she had believed the chapter connected to the transplant belonged in the past. A decision made long ago. A life saved. A story finished. Yet somehow, fate had refused to leave it there. By noon, she found herself walking through Lincoln Park beneath a clear autumn sky. Leaves drifted across the pathways in shades of gold and amber. Families strolled through the park. Joggers passed by. The city felt peaceful for the first time in weeks. Then she noticed someone standing near a bench overlooking the water. Ryan. He was dressed simply, without security, assistance, or the polished image that usually surrounded him. Just a man waiting quietly. For a moment, neither moved. Then Claire approached. Ryan stood immediately. Thank you for coming. Claire folded her arms lightly. I almost did not. Ryan nodded. I would not have blamed you. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, Ryan spoke. I spent 5 years looking for you. Claire looked away toward the lake. Why? Because every morning I woke up knowing my future existed because of someone else's kindness. His voice remained calm, and I wanted to understand the person behind it. Claire smiled faintly. You already know the answer. Ryan frowned slightly. Do I? She nodded. There was never anything to understand. Someone needed help. I could help. That was all. Ryan laughed softly, almost in disbelief. That is exactly what makes you extraordinary. Claire shook her head. No, it makes me human. For the first time, Ryan truly understood. The gift she had given years ago was never about sacrifice. It was about compassion, not something she viewed as heroic. Simply part of who she was. They spent the next hour walking through the park, talking about everything they had never discussed before. Her mother, his early struggles building the company, the loneliness they had both carried in different ways. By the time the sun began setting behind the skyline, something had changed. Not because a debt had been repaid, because two people finally saw each other clearly. Months later, Claire accepted a new position at Sullivan Dynamics. Not through favors, not through special treatment. She completed a competitive interview process and earned the role herself. Ryan respected every boundary she requested. Trust rebuilt slowly, one conversation at a time. 1 year later, on a quiet spring evening, Ryan drove Claire to a small cemetery outside the city. They stood together before her mother's headstone. He placed a bouquet of white lilies beside it and smiled. I wish I could thank her. Claire felt tears gather in her eyes. Ryan looked toward the sky before turning back to her. Maybe this is enough. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and carefully removed a folded piece of paper protected inside a clear sleeve. The same letter. The same 5 words. Live a life worth saving. You gave me a future, he said softly. But the best part of that future was finding you. Claire smiled through her tears as he gently took her hand. There was no grand audience. No cameras, no speeches, just two lives brought together by an act of kindness years earlier. And as the evening sunlight painted the world in gold, both of them finally understood that the greatest rewards in life are never earned through wealth or success. They are found in the people who choose kindness when no one is watching.